Chapter 1. Shadows of the Night. Between the golden dunes of the desert and the cool valleys of the oases, rose a kingdom of unparalleled beauty. The Golden Kingdom, as it was called by those who admired it, shone under the scorching sun of the east. The royal palace, with its high domes and ornate walls with delicate mosaics, it seemed like a dream carved in stone, a symbol of power and wisdom. Emperor Jalal, a respected ruler, was known for his fair judgment and moderation in decisions. Next to him, Empress Nuria, a woman of rare beauty and sharp intelligence, divided her days between court duties and caring for her people. In the eyes of her subjects, she was a symbol of gentleness and compassion, but in her heart she carried a responsibility that no one suspected. Night, when darkness covered the city and everyone thought that the royal family was resting, Empress Nuria would put on a tattered garment, cover her face with a dusty veil and walk the narrow streets of the city under the name of Zara. She would sneak among the merchants, mingle with the beggars and listen to the complaints of the oppressed. She was the eyes and ears of the palace were in places where no one dared venture. The city around the palace was a place full of color and life. By day, the markets echoed with the cries of vendors offering spices brought from distant lands, silk fabrics, and glittering jewelry. Craftsmen carved wood with skill, and poets recited verses under the shade of date palms. But as night fell, another city came to life, one where thieves and swindlers ran wild, where the weak were exploited, and where corruption spread like a plague. During those nights, Nuria saw the hidden faces of those who appeared honest during the day. She watched the soulless moneylenders who ruined entire families, the dishonest merchants who sold spoiled goods for gold, and the city guards who turned a blind eye in exchange for coins. Sometimes, she intervened directly, slipping money to the poor or helping a hungry child. Other times, just observe and memorize every detail, so that in the morning, in the throne room, the Emperor Jalal to pronounce a fair and implacable sentence. Unbeknownst to anyone, the Empress was the one guiding the hand of justice. On one such night, while sneaking through a marginal neighborhood, Nuria noticed a scene that caught her attention. Stooped old man, in tattered clothes, was being pushed by two soldiers, accused of not having paid his taxes. The old man defended himself weakly, his voice trembling, saying that he had been cheated by a merchant who had taken all his earnings. Nuria approached slowly, pretending to look for work among the gathered poor. She listened to every word, noting the cruel expressions of the soldiers and the fear in the old man's eyes. She noted in her mind the name of the merchant the old man was talking about and decided that the next day this injustice would be righted. In the morning, in the throne room, Emperor Jalal was informed of a complaint brought against an influential merchant. With a raised eyebrow, she looked at Nuria, who kept her gaze serene, not betraying anything. The merchant was summoned before the court and interrogated, and the evidence gathered during the night was enough for him to be convicted and punished. This was the secret power of the Empress, an unseen but relentless justice. The people believed that the emperor had a divine gift to discover evil, but the truth was much simpler. A brave woman risked her life every night to bring justice to her kingdom. No one knew this secret except her daughter, Princess Layla, a young woman with eyes like ink and a soul as fierce as her mother's. Layla had grown up seeing that the world was not always fair. She promised her mother that one day she would follow in her footsteps, but Nuria hoped that she could be spared this burden. The nights passed, and the Empress continued to play her role as a justice. Her heart began to be burdened with questions. How long could she continue like this? If someone discovered the truth, what would happen to her, to her daughter, to the kingdom? But these thoughts did not stop her from dressing in her tattered robes every night and walking through the city, seeking justice in the darkness. She knew that her duty was above all else. And so, under the starry sky of the Golden Kingdom, Empress Nuria walked forward, carrying in her soul the love of her people and the burden of a secret that could change everything. On a particularly quiet evening, the warm desert wind brought the scents of jasmine and cinnamon, and the city seemed immersed in an illusory peace. But Nuria knew that silence was often the prelude to a storm. In the distance, hurried footsteps echoed on the stone flags, and long shadows crept through the dark corners of the square. She prepared for a night that would change her destiny forever. Dressed in Zara's shabby robes, she walked carefully through the side streets, sensing that something was different. Usually she could move unnoticed, but that night, she felt eyes following her every step. She stopped near an abandoned stall, listening carefully to the sounds of the night. A figure slipped out of the shadows and quickly disappeared around a corner. She followed. She had years of experience in such incursions, but she had never been discovered. The thought that someone might know her secret made her quicken her steps. If anyone suspected the truth, the entire kingdom would be in danger. She slipped down a dark alley. She heard a faint hiss. She stopped suddenly, but it was too late. Two pairs of strong hands grabbed her from the shadows and pulled her into a hidden courtyard. She tried to free herself, but the strength of the attackers overwhelmed her. "Who are you?" whispered a harsh voice. "Why are you sneaking around the city at this hour?" Nuria regained her composure and looked up at her captors. There were two men in simple clothes, but their gazes were studying her carefully, as if trying to decipher her. Behind them, a slimmer young man with an imposing presence seemed to be their leader. His dark eyes stared at her, as if waiting to see if she was lying. "I am just a poor woman," she replied in a trembling voice. "I am looking for work to survive." The young man smiled slightly, but it was a smile devoid of warmth. "You are lying. I have been following Zara for some time. You are not what you seem to be, and I believe you know things that others do not." The Empress's heart beat faster. Who were these people? And, more importantly, how much did they know about her? "I don't understand what you mean," she tried to buy time. "You understand very well," the young man replied, approaching. "The kingdom hides many secrets, and you seem to be one of their keys." Nuria felt that she was caught in a dangerous game. Whoever these people were, they were not simple robbers. They were organized, they knew what they were looking for, and if they found out the truth, everything she had built so far could have been destroyed. "We will let you go, but you will come with us tomorrow night," the young man said in an authoritative tone. "We need someone like you. If you refuse, we will find out who you really are." Nuria hid her fear behind a mask of resignation. She had no choice. She had to find out who these people were before they found out who she was. That night, as she walked silently back to the palace, a restlessness grew in her soul like she had never felt before. The next day, in the throne room, Nuria maintained her usual calm. Emperor Jalal discussed with his advisors a series of mysterious robberies that had taken place in recent months, and no one had been caught, and many of the nobles suspected that a well-hidden organization was behind them. Nuria began to piece together the information. The men who had captured her did not seem like simple robbers, but could they be connected to the robberies? Were they enemies of the kingdom or a hidden force fighting for a greater purpose? When night fell again, Nuria put on Zara's clothes again and slipped outside. This time, she was no longer just an observer of the suffering of the people, but a woman in search of a truth that could change the destiny of the kingdom. In the distance, on a dark alley, the silhouette of the unknown young man awaited her. A new battle was about to begin, one in which the danger came not only from the shadows of the night, but also from secrets she could never have imagined. The night air was heavy, charged with mystery and anxiety. Nuria hid her face under the dusty veil, but this time she was no longer just an unnoticed shadow in the city. She was heading towards the meeting with the unknown who had discovered her secret. Her steps were calculated, but her heart was beating faster than usual. Whoever these people were, they had a specific purpose, and she had to find out if they represented a threat to the kingdom or, perhaps, an opportunity to discover hidden truths. When she arrived at the appointed place, the unknown young man was waiting for her, leaning against a wall, looking at her with an impenetrable expression. "You have come," he said, without a trace of surprise. "I had no choice," Nuria replied calmly. The young man smiled faintly, then gestured to two men standing in the shadows. They approached and motioned for her to follow. Nuria considered running for a moment, but she knew that any hesitation would have seemed suspicious, though she stepped forward resolutely. They were led through a maze of narrow streets until they reached an old wooden door, hidden between two dilapidated buildings. The young man knocked 3 times, and the door opened without a sound. Inside, a dimly lit room greeted them with trembling shadows and unfamiliar faces. "Who are these people?" Nuria asked, letting her gaze slide over those present. "Those who are tired of corruption," the young man replied. "Those who see the truth beyond the golden gates of the palace." A murmur passed through the room. Nuria kept her calm, but dangerous scenarios were already forming in her mind. These people were not simple rebels. They were well organized, and if they were right about what they said about corruption, then things were worse than she had imagined. "And what do you want from me?" she asked directly. The young man took a step closer. His gaze shone like a sharp blade in the dim light. "We want you to help us change the kingdom. And I believe you are exactly the person we need. At that moment, Nuria understood that she was at a dangerous crossroads. By accepting, she could discover truths that had been hidden even from her. But if she was wrong, the entire kingdom, including her family, would be in danger. Your choice, Zara, the young man said, speaking her false name with a hint of challenge. Nuria took a deep breath. She was about to step into a dangerous game, and the first step had to be taken with the utmost care. The secrets of the night had begun to be revealed, but would the truth she sought be one she was prepared to face? Nuria hid her hesitation under an impassive expression. The young man's eyes fixed on her, waiting for an answer. Around them, the murmur of those present died away, leaving only the oppressive silence of expectation. If you want to change the kingdom, I need to know who you really are, she said, trying to buy time. The young man smiled, but his smile lacked warmth. We'll get there. But first, you have to prove your loyalty to us. Nuria remained calm, but every fiber of her body was on alert. Whoever these people were, they weren't acting randomly. If she refused, there were two possibilities. Either they'd let her go but keep following her, or she wouldn't get out of there alive. If she accepted, she could infiltrate deeper and find out who was leading them and what their true plans were. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice still determined. The young man tossed her a sealed envelope. Take this message to a trusted man. You will find him in the spice market tomorrow evening. You will recognize him by the silver ring with the seal of a moon. If you refuse, well, you will not have the opportunity to refuse anything else. Nuria took the envelope without betraying her thoughts. Whatever message was hidden in that parchment, it was clear that this was her test. If she carried out the mission to the end, she would gain their trust. But above all, she had to find out who was the Rayol force behind this organization's and what threat it posed to Jalal and their kingdom. When she left the building, the night air felt colder than usual. She hurried to the palace, where her daughter Layla was waiting for her. She greeted her with questioning eyes, but Nuria said nothing. Not yet. The night passed without sleep. The next day, in the throne room, Emperor Jalal listened to the complaints of the nobles and merchants. Nuria watched him carefully, wondering how much had been hidden even from him. Did the corruption these people spoke of extend to the highest circles of power? As night fell, Nuria put on her dusty veil again and headed for the spice market and the light of the lanterns. She looked for the man with the silver ring. When she found him, she handed him the envelope without saying a word. The man looked at her carefully, then took the message and hid it in the folds of his coat. Welcome to the game, Zara, he whispered, before disappearing into the crowd. In that moment, Nuria understood that she had stepped onto a path of no return. She was now between two worlds, that of the palace and that of the shadows. And above all, she had to find out who was betraying whom before it was too late. Danger was approaching, and the Golden Kingdom was no longer as safe as before. Nuria pulled her veil closer over her face and retreated into the shadow of a spice stand, watching as the man who had received the message disappeared among the lantern-lit stalls. A deep unease gripped her soul. Had she just helped start a revolt? Or had she simply become involved in a conspiracy much larger than she had imagined? As she returned to the palace, every noise of the night seemed amplified. Chapter 2. A dangerous secret. The deserted streets hid unseen dangers, and shadows seemed to be following her. Although she was used to going out at night, this time she felt different. An unpleasant feeling had crept into her mind. Someone was watching her. Arriving at the palace, she slipped through the dark corridors, heading towards her apartments. But when she opened the door, a figure was waiting for her in the shadows. Layla was standing on the edge of the window, looking at her mother with eyes full of concern. "Mom, what's happening? Why do you look so restless?" asked the young princess. Nuria hesitated for a moment, then approached her daughter and took her hands in hers. "Layla, there are things you don't need to know yet, but you have to trust me. What I do is for the good of the kingdom." Layla pursed her lips, but did not insist. She knew that her mother would not hide anything from her without a good reason. The next morning, the palace was abuzz with excitement. A messenger sent by one of the kingdom's governors had brought worrying news. In a distant province, an unknown group was inciting the population against the imperial government. Jalal was fidgeting his hands on the arms of the throne, listening to the information with a thoughtful expression. Nuria was holding her breath. Could it be related to the message he had delivered the previous night? "We must find out who is behind these disturbances," Jalal said firmly. I will not allow our kingdom to be shaken by baseless riots. Nuriya's gaze moved to the crowd gathered in the throne room. Among the nobles and advisors, the watchful eyes of traitors hid behind masks of loyalty. She was right under their gaze, playing a dangerous game. That night Nuriya decided to meet again with the strangers who had recruited her. She had to find out the truth before the kingdom was torn apart by betrayal. Dressed once again in Zara's tattered clothes, she crept through the deserted streets, her heart pounding. But this time, someone was really following her. A barely perceptible sound behind her made her muscles tense. She continued on her way as if she had not noticed anything, but when she approached a dark corner, she turned suddenly. A shadow crept back into the darkness. "Who are you?" she said, her firm voice defying the fear that gripped her stomach. The man slowly stepped forward. His face was covered in a black veil, but his eyes burned with a familiar intensity. "Do you think only you have secrets, Zara?" he whispered, and in that moment, Nuriya understood that the true threat was only beginning to reveal itself. Nuriya felt a cold shiver run down her spine as the mysterious man's gaze pierced her like a blade hidden in the darkness. For a few moments, no one spoke. Then he took a step forward, and the faint light of the lantern revealed his features more clearly. "Who are you?" she asked again, without letting her voice tremble. The man hesitated, then lifted his veil a little, revealing part of his face. He had sharp features, a fine scar on his left cheek, and eyes of a disturbing amber. "A friend, or an enemy, depending on what you choose to be," he answered enigmatically. "But I know who you are, Zara. And I know you are playing a dangerous game." Nuriya folded her arms, studying him. "If you know so much, then you know why I am doing it." The man smiled, but it was a joyless smile. "You seek justice. But be careful, Queen of Shadows, sometimes the truth you seek is more dangerous than the lie you live." She took a step back, feeling that the man knew more than he let on. "Why are you following me? What do you want from me?" she asked, a little uneasy. He tilted his head slightly. "I'm not the only one following you, Nuriya. You've caught the attention of powerful people. And some of them don't want you to return to the palace." A lump formed in her throat. If what he was saying was true, then not only was she in danger, but Jalal too, and Layla. "Tell me who these people are," she demanded. But the man was already taking a step back, swallowed by the shadows. "You'll find out soon. But be careful, Queen of Shadows. Sometimes the most dangerous betrayals come from where you least expect them." Then he disappeared, leaving Nuriya with more questions than answers. He returned to the palace, but his mind was a chaos of thoughts. What if someone inside was conspiring against them? What if Jalal was betrayed by the very people he trusted most? That night, for the first time in many years, Nuriya felt vulnerable. Not because she feared for herself, but because she sensed that the storm that was coming would overturn the entire kingdom. Morning came with a heavy silence. Nuriya had not closed her eyes all night, and her thoughts were stirring in her mind like a swarm of wasps. If someone in the palace was indeed conspiring against them, then every move had to be made with the utmost caution. In the throne room, Jalal listened to the reports of his advisors. Unrest was growing in the kingdom, and a province on the edge of the desert. A few nobles had refused to pay the tribute, and rumors of an uprising were spreading rapidly. The emperor stared at the map of the kingdom, then placed his heavy palm on the table. "We must find out who is behind these disturbances before it is too late," he said, his voice deep. Nuriya felt a cold tingle on the back of her neck. Her thoughts flew to the mysterious man from the previous night. What if all of this was connected? What if the revolt was just a piece in a much larger game? After the counselors left the hall, Nuriya was left alone with Jalal. The emperor let his shoulders droop and looked at his wife with concern. "You are quiet today, my love," he said. "Is something troubling you?" Nuriya hesitated for a moment. She wanted to tell him the truth, but what if he insisted on not exposing himself to further danger? What if he tried to keep her from what she felt was her duty? "Nothing important, Jalal. Just thoughts about the kingdom." He touched her hand lightly and smiled, but his brown eyes showed clearly that he was not convinced. That night, Nuriya crept through the city streets again. But this time, she was no longer just an unseen shadow. She felt stalking eyes at every corner. Danger hung in the air, like an unseen sword ready to fall. She approached the edge of the square. A figure suddenly appeared in front of her. A hand clamped onto her arm and pulled her behind. A dark wall. "Enough with the games, Shadow Queen," a deep voice whispered. It's time to choose a side. In that moment, Nuria understood that the decisive moment had come, and her choice could change the fate of the entire kingdom. Nuria felt her heart pound as her gaze settled on the man who had captured her and the dim light of the lantern. His features seemed familiar, but the threat in his voice was real. "Who are you?" she whispered, trying to remain calm. The man let go of her arm, but remained close. "It doesn't matter who I am, it matters who are hunting you. You have played too much with fire, Shadow Queen. And the fire is about to consume you." Nuria felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "Tell me what you know." The man glanced around, making sure they weren't being followed, then leaned closer and whispered. "An advisor to the Emperor is betraying him. And not just him. There are many who want Jalal to fall. The uprising in the province is just the beginning." Nuria clenched her fists. "Named, I need a name." The man took a step back. "Not yet. But if you want to know the truth, be at the edge of the city tomorrow night. Alone." Before she could answer, he disappeared into the darkness. He returned to the palace, his mind racked with questions. If there was a traitor so close to Jalal, who could it be? And how much time did they have before their enemies struck? The next day at noon, as the Emperor conferred with his advisors, Nuria watched them carefully. Each face seemed unchanged, but behind the familiar faces could be the enemy. She had to find out the truth. Before it was too late, as night fell again over the kingdom, Nuria crept out of the palace, ready to find out who was truly on the Emperor's side and who wanted him down. The night air was heavy with mystery when Nuria reached the edge of the city. A pale moon watched over her, and the sounds of the city faded into the distance. She covered her face with her tattered veil and held her hand close to the dagger hidden under her cloak. If it was a trap, it had to be ready. She waited a few moments, tense, until a shadow emerged from the darkness. "You have come," the familiar voice whispered. "I need answers," Nuria said, keeping her tone calm. "Tell me who is betraying the Emperor." The man approached slowly, his face looking at her with a heavy seriousness. "Councillor Rashid, he is the one financing the rebel nobles. But he does not act alone. There is an unseen hand guiding his steps, a shadowy power, far greater than you might think." Rashid's name seared her mind like red-hot iron. He was one of Jalal's oldest advisors, a respected and trusted man. How could this be possible? "I need proof," she whispered, feeling a whirlwind of thoughts overwhelm her. "You will have them, but you must be patient. If you accuse him without evidence, you will also be the suspect." Nuria nodded. She knew she could not act hastily. If Rashid was indeed the traitor, she had to catch him red-handed. "There is something else you need to know," the man continued. "Someone in the palace already suspects the truth about you. And if the truth comes out, you will no longer be safe." Nuria felt a cold claw in her chest. If anyone found out that she was Zara, the night's vigilante, she could lose everything. Jalal's trust, her life, maybe even her daughter, Layla. "Who knows?" she asked. But the man was already retreating into the shadows. "You will find out soon." And then he disappeared, leaving her alone with a heavy weight on her soul. She had to play this game very carefully, because from now on, every wrong step could be fatal. That night, Nuria returned to the palace with her mind overwhelmed with thoughts. Her steps were light as a shadow, but her heart was beating fast. If Rashid was indeed the traitor, then every decision had to be made with great care. She could not risk being discovered before she had gathered the necessary evidence. Arriving in her room, she sat by the window, staring out into space. The city was sleeping, but danger lurked in every dark corner. Did Jalal suspect something? Did he imagine that one of his trusted men was preparing her downfall? The morning found her tired but determined. In the throne room, the atmosphere was tense. The nobles and advisors murmured among themselves, and Jalal looked at them coldly. Nuria felt Rashid's gaze linger on her for a moment. Did he suspect something? The Emperor raised his hand, asking for silence. "I have received worrying news about the situation in the provinces," he said. "The uprising is growing, and someone is fueling it from the shadows." All the advisors exchanged glances, feigning surprise. Only Rashid seemed unfazed. "We must act quickly, Your Majesty," he said in a calculated tone. "Perhaps we should send troops to restore order." Nuria bit her lip. If they had sent troops, it would have been even easier for the conspirators to divert the conflict. She needed more time. "Perhaps we should first investigate the source of this uprising," she interjected, choosing her words carefully. Some merchants complain that the roads are dangerous. Perhaps the chaos is not accidental. Jalal looked at her for a long time, as if he had guessed her intentions, but finally nodded. So be it, we will investigate first. Rashid said nothing, but Nuriya sensed a subtle change in his attitude. Was it just an impression, or was the trader starting to become suspicious? Later, in the silence of the palace, Nuriya felt someone following her. She stopped, listening carefully. A shadow moved quickly in a corner of the corridor. She clenched a dagger under her cloak. It was clear. Someone had been watching her movements. The game was becoming dangerous, and the next step could decide the fate of the entire kingdom. Nuriya quickly hid her emotions and continued down the corridor, although every fiber of her being was on alert. The footsteps of the one who was following her had stopped. She knew that it was not just an impression. Someone was spying on her carefully, waiting for the right moment to act. Arriving in her room, she pulled back her veil and took a deep breath. If she was discovered now, everything would collapse. She had to find out who the shadow in the palace was that was watching her. The next day, she pretended to be inattentive and pursued by thoughts as she walked through the palace gardens. She felt the oppressive gaze on her. She stopped by a fountain and ran her fingers through the cold water, pretending to be absorbed in the morning silence. Then, in a quick movement, she turned. A figure hid behind a marble pillar. "Come out into the light," she whispered, prepared for anything. The figure hesitated, then showed itself. Nuriya felt a surge of surprise when she recognized it. It was Layla. "What are you doing here?" the Empress asked, looking at her closely. The princess clasped her hands and hesitated, but then raised her chin resolutely. "I have been following you, mother. I know you are hiding something." Nuriya felt her heart jump. Had she realized? Was she ready to know the truth? "Why do you think that?" He tried to test her. "Last night I saw you leaving the palace. And it wasn't the first time." "Mother, who are you really?" In her daughter's eyes, Nuriya saw the mixture of curiosity, fear, and admiration. The moment she had tried to avoid had come faster than she would have liked. "Layla, you have to trust me," she said softly. "But there are dangerous things I can't tell you." The princess didn't back down. "Then let me help you. Whatever you do, I want to be by your side." Nuriya closed her eyes for a moment. She should have pushed her away, protected her. But Layla was her daughter, a part of her. And maybe one day she would follow in her footsteps. "Okay," she said finally. "But if you go this way, there will be no turning back." Layla nodded, fearlessly. And in that moment, their fates changed forever. Chapter 3. Layla's First Choices. That night, Nuriya and Layla left the palace together for the first time. The Empress looked at her daughter with care, but also with pride. Layla was young, but her dark eyes burned with determination. Perhaps she was indeed ready to see the world for what it truly was. They crept through the dark streets, avoiding patrols, and headed for a modest inn, where Nuriya was to meet an informant. As they drew closer, Layla's voice became whispery but curious. "How long have you been doing this, mother?" "Years," Nuriya replied, avoiding giving a precise answer. "I swore to protect the kingdom not only from the palace, but also from the shadows." "Does my father know?" "No, and he must never know." Layla fell silent, reflecting on her mother's words. She loved her father, but she was beginning to understand that power and justice came not only from the throne, but also from the unseen sacrifices made in his name. They reached the inn and entered discreetly. In a dark corner of the room, a hooded man was waiting for them. He was Malik, one of Nuriya's most trusted men. "I have news," he whispered. "The traitors are preparing to act. They will try to remove the emperor during tomorrow's council." Nuriya felt a cold shiver run down her spine. They were attacking faster than she had expected. She turned to Layla, who was listening with wide eyes. "Now do you understand why we must stay one step ahead of them?" The princess nodded. She was no longer just a spectator. Now, she was part of the game. "What should we do?" she asked. Nuriya looked at Malik and said firmly, "We must foil their plan. And for that, we must return to the palace before it is too late." Nuriya and Layla slipped out of the inn, knowing that every second counted. As they advanced through the dark streets of the city, Nuriya's thoughts raced rapidly. If the traitors planned to act during tomorrow's council, it meant they had people infiltrated the palace itself. She could trust no one but her daughter and a few trusted allies. Reaching the palace gates, They slipped through a side corridor, using the secret entrance Nuria had discovered years ago. Once she was safely there, Nuria turned her gaze to Layla. "You must be careful tomorrow," she told her. "We do not know who is involved in this conspiracy." Layla nodded, but in her eyes Nuria saw a new determination. "I want to help, Mother. Tell me what I can do." The Empress placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder and sighed. "You will be my eyes in the throne room. Listen to every word, every whisper. If anyone is acting strangely, I want to know immediately." The next morning, the palace was bustling with preparations for the council. The advisors, nobles, and generals had gathered in the throne room, and Emperor Jalal, untouched by the unseen danger, took his seat with dignity. Nuria and Layla sat in their seats, observing in silence. At one point, Layla felt someone watching her intently. When she turned her head slightly, her gaze met Rashid's. His expression was cold, calculated. He was preparing to do something. Layla immediately turned her attention to her mother and made a discreet sign to her. Nuria understood immediately. The danger was closer than they had thought. At that moment, one of the advisors suddenly stood up. "Your Highness, we have an urgent matter to discuss," he exclaimed, attracting everyone's attention. But Nuria already knew the truth. The palace coup had begun. The moment the advisor stood up and spoke those words, the throne room was engulfed in a heavy silence. Jalal turned his gaze to him, unaware that at that moment, in the shadows, a dangerous betrayal was being set in motion. Nuria held her breath and tensed every muscle. She felt that the attack was imminent. Layla, in turn, clasped her hands in her lap, aware that any mistake could be fatal. "Say, why the rush?" the Emperor asked, his voice calm but authoritative. The advisor tilted his head slightly and spoke words that echoed like a gloomy echo. "Your Majesty, treason lies within the palace." A murmur passed through the hall, and everyone's gazes turned to the Emperor. Jalal narrowed his eyes, analyzing the advisor's words. "What do you mean? Who would dare betray the kingdom?" At that moment, Rashid took a step forward. He took out the dagger from his belt and raised it towards the Emperor. "Me!" His cry was followed by instant chaos. The royal guards tried to intervene, but in the crowd of advisors and nobles, the traitors were already there. Swords were drawn from their sheaths, and the sound of metal clashing against metal filled the throne room. Nuria reacted without hesitation. She stood up abruptly and grabbed Layla by the wrist, pulling her back, away from danger. Emperor Jalal stood up, glaring at Rashid with anger. Nuria knew this was the decisive moment. "Guards! Defend the Emperor!" she shouted, and the loyal soldiers began to move. Rashid and his men rushed to the throne, but Jalal, although surprised, he was no weak ruler. He grabbed the sword by the throne and met the attack with determination. Nuria and Layla had to reach him before it was too late. But to save Jalal, they had to first survive the siege that had just begun. The battle in the throne room was in full swing. Swords clashed, battle cries echoed through the imposing columns, and the traitors revealed their true colors. Jalal, although surprised by the attack, fought with strength and skill, repelling Rashid's blows. Nuria pushed Layla against a column, shielding her from a dagger blow. "Stay close to me," she shouted. Layla, her heart pounding, pulled out the dagger hidden in her belt. She was no longer a mere spectator. If she wanted to defend her family and her kingdom, she had to fight. One of the traitors lunged at the Emperor, but Jalal managed to knock him down with a precise blow. However, the enemy was in great numbers, and the loyalists were outnumbered. "We must get them out of the palace," shouted Malik, one of Nuria's allies, fighting side by side with the Emperor's guards. Nuria looked around and made a quick decision. If they wanted to win, they had to destabilize the traitors. "Jalal, we must reach the balcony. If the people see what is happening, they will not let the betrayal triumph." The Emperor understood the plan immediately. With a quick gesture, he and his guards began to make their way to the great terrace of the palace. Layla and Nuria followed closely, while Rashid shouted his orders angrily. Arriving on the balcony, Jalal raised his sword to the sky, and his voice thundered over the crowd gathered in the courtyard. "The traitors want to steal our kingdom. But the kingdom is us, all of us who love justice." The people, seeing the blood and the fight, burst into a cry of rage. The loyal guards in the city began to move towards the palace, and the traitors, seeing that they were losing the advantage, began to retreat. Rashid, filled with despair, gripped his dagger and headed towards Jalal. But before he could take a step, a blade passed through his shoulder. Layla, her eyes burning with determination, withdrew her dagger and looked him straight in the eye. "Treason pays," she whispered. Rashid fell to his knees as the guards surrounded him. The battle was over. Jalal looked at Nuriya and Layla, realizing that without them, the throne would be lost. And for the first time, Nuriya understood that her daughter was truly ready to follow in his footsteps. But even though the traitors had been defeated, she knew that the shadows of danger had not completely disappeared, and that a new chapter in the fight for the kingdom was only just beginning to dawn. After the tumultuous night that had shaken the kingdom, the palace still bore the scars of battle. The columns were stained with blood, and the polished floors had witnessed a near-fatal betrayal. But the throne remained intact, and Emperor Jalal was still on it. Nuriya ran her fingers over the balcony railing, watching the city come to life. People murmured about the events of the day. The night was dark, and rumors of betrayal were spreading fast. Soon, the kingdom would be tested again, and she knew she had to be prepared. Layla was bandaging a shallow wound on her arm as her father approached her. "Are you hurt?" Jalal asked, genuine concern in his eyes. "It's nothing, father. Just a reminder of what happened last night," Layla said, trying to sound strong. Jalal touched her shoulder proudly. "You were brave, my daughter. But what happened last night wasn't the end. Rashid and his accomplices were just part of a larger conspiracy. Someone outside wants to see our kingdom on its knees." Nuriya turned to them, her gaze determined. "We must find out who is pulling the strings in the shadows. If Rashid was just a pawn, then the real danger still lurks." Jalal nodded and called his most trusted advisors. While they were preparing a discreet investigation into those involved in the betrayal, a messenger came rushing in, bringing news from the western border. "Your Majesty, an unknown army was sighted in the desert, advancing towards our kingdom." Silence fell in the hall. If an external enemy were to take advantage of the internal chaos to attack, then the kingdom was in greater danger than they had thought. Nuriya tightened her cloak around her shoulders. Deep down, she felt that this was only the beginning of a much greater battle. And that, to protect her kingdom, she must be prepared to go further than ever. A heavy tension hung in the air as Emperor Jalal prepared to convene his council of war. The message brought by the messenger left no room for doubt. An unknown army was approaching from the west, and its intentions were far from peaceful. Layla sat next to her mother, listening to the discussions between the royal generals. She had learned over the years to observe and understand defense strategies, but now she realized that the theories discussed in the palace paled in the face of a real threat. "We must find out who is leading this army before it is too late," he said. Nuriya, her voice calm but firm. "Someone orchestrated the betrayal from within the palace. They may also be involved in this attack." Jalal agreed, and his gaze fell on one of the leaders of the Imperial Guard. "Send scouts to the desert. I want us to know as much as possible about this enemy." Meanwhile, Layla felt her blood boil. She felt that she had to do more, that she could not stand aside and watch as others made decisions for the future of the kingdom. That night, without telling anyone, she put on a dark cloak, covered her face with a veil and slipped out of the palace. If anyone could discover the truth, it was her. She had learned all too well from her mother how to remain invisible in the darkness. Under the starry sky, Layla set off towards the edge of the city, not knowing that this choice would change her destiny forever. Layla advanced with calculated steps through the shadows of the city, avoiding the curious gazes and the patrols of the Imperial Guards. She knew that if anyone recognized her, the consequences would be serious, but she took this risk. She had to find out who was behind the imminent attack on the kingdom. Arriving at the edge of the city, she slipped into a modest tavern, frequented by mercenaries and merchants from all over the world. The low voices of men discussing business, the exchange of watchful glances, and the smell of cheap wine created an oppressive atmosphere. Layla pulled her hood closer over her head and sat in a dark corner, listening. Two massive figures, covered in dusty cloaks, spoke in whispers at a nearby table. Over the background noise, Layla managed to catch a few words. "Troops gathered, commanders waiting. The signal. The siege will begin soon." Layla tensed her muscles. This was clear evidence that the attack on the kingdom was closer than they had thought. Trying to appear uninterested, she raised a glass of water, but at that moment one of the men's gazes stopped on her. His searching eyes fixed her with suspicion. "You don't seem to be from around here," he said, his voice ringing like a warning. Layla swallowed her fear and answered in a calm tone. I'm traveling around the kingdom, I'm looking for work. The man narrowed his eyes, but before he could ask any more questions, the door to the tavern suddenly opened, a group of foreign soldiers entered, and Layla noticed with horror that on their breastplates was the insignia of an unknown army. These were not ordinary mercenaries. They were the people who were going to attack the kingdom. With her heart beating wildly, Layla understood that she had to get out of there as quickly as possible. But before she could get up, one of the soldiers spotted her and, in a sharp voice, shouted, "Hey, you! Who are you and what are you doing here?" Layla knew she had no choice. She had to run. Now. Layla stood up abruptly, knocking her glass of water over the table. The gazes from the tavern turned to her, but she had no time to hesitate. With a quick movement, she pulled her hood tighter over her head and headed for the door. But the foreign soldiers had already risen, and one of them blocked her way. "I asked who you are," he said, in a sharp voice. Layla felt her heart pounding. If they recognized her or realized that she was a spy, she would not escape with her life. She took a deep breath and tried to remain calm. "I am just a traveler. I do not want any trouble," she said, backing away. "Then why are you listening to other people's conversations?" asked another soldier, taking a threatening step towards her. Layla did not wait for an answer. With a swift movement, she pushed the man away and ran for the exit. Screams rang out behind her, and the soldiers gave chase. She slipped through the dark alleys, avoiding the crowded squares, knowing that any mistake could mean her end. She had to reach the palace before the soldiers caught her, and in the distance, she saw the imposing walls of the palace and felt a surge of relief. But before she reached the gates, two men stepped out of the shadows and blocked her path. They were not palace guards. They were enemy spies. "I think we have an interesting visitor," one of them said, smiling cruelly. Layla clenched her fists. She couldn't back down. If she wanted to save her kingdom, she had to fight. Layla felt the blood pounding in her temples as she studied the two men blocking her path. In their cold, assessing eyes, she could clearly see hostile intentions. She had no choice. She had to fight. Without thinking, she took a side step and, with the agility she had inherited from her mother, hit one of the spies with a quick punch in the chest, unsteadying him. The other tried to catch her, but Layla lowered herself and knocked him to the ground with a well-calculated move. She couldn't waste time. She got up and ran towards the palace gates, but just then the guards opened them for a convoy of wagons, and the noise attracted the attention of her pursuers. Angry shouts rang out behind her. Layla knew that if she didn't reach the safety of the palace at that moment, she would be caught. Fortunately, a familiar figure appeared. At the gate Taiti was Azim, the captain of the royal guard and her protector since childhood. Seeing the danger, he drew his sword and advanced threateningly towards the attackers. "Back!" Azim shouted. "This is the Emperor's daughter. Any attempt to harm her means death." The spies hesitated for only a moment, but that was enough for Layla to slip behind Azim and step into the safety of the palace. Once the massive gates closed, she felt a wave of relief run through her body. "I need to talk to my parents," she said, panting. Chapter 4. Shadows of the Past. "The enemy army is closer than we think." Azim looked at her seriously and nodded. "Come on, princess, we have no time to waste." Layla headed towards the throne room. A new determination was born in her heart. She was no longer just a princess. Now, she was becoming a fighter for her kingdom. Layla hurriedly walked into the throne room, where Emperor Jalal and Empress Nuria were already discussing with their advisors. Everyone's faces were frowning, and the air in the room was filled with tension. The news of the imminent attack had begun to spread, and the kingdom was on the verge of a crucial decision. "Father! Mother!" Layla shouted, attracting everyone's attention. "I have been to the city and learned important information. The enemy army is already at our gates. They are preparing to attack the next night." Emperor Jalal clenched his jaw, looking at his daughter with a worried expression. "How do you know this?" he asked. Layla took a deep breath and told them everything she had learned in the tavern and about the confrontation she had had with the enemy spies. Everyone present listened carefully, exchanging worried glances among themselves. "If you are telling the truth, then we must prepare for battle right now," said Azim, the captain of the guard. "There is no time to waste." Empress Nuria took a step forward, looking at Layla with pride, but also with concern. You have done a dangerous thing, my daughter. But you have brought invaluable information. Now we must decide how we will defend our kingdom. Emperor Jalal raised his hand, asking for silence. Send messengers to our allies. If war is inevitable, we will not fight it alone. Tonight, we will fortify the palace walls and prepare our men for battle. We will not let the Golden Kingdom fall into the hands of our enemies. A murmur of approval filled the throne room. Layla looked at the faces of those around her and felt that this was the decisive moment. The future of the kingdom depended on what would happen that night. I want to fight too, Layla said resolutely. Emperor Jalal looked at her for a long time, and then, with a deep sigh, nodded. Then prepare yourself, my daughter. The sunrise will bring either victory or the end of our kingdom. Night had fallen over the Golden Kingdom, and the palace was a hive of activity. Soldiers sharpened their swords, messengers galloped in all directions to send final orders, and craftsmen reinforced the city gates. A heavy silence hung in the air, like a harbinger of the battle to come. Layla, dressed in light armor, strode through the inner courtyard of the palace. Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze was determined. She was no longer just a princess, but a defender of her kingdom. Are you sure you want to do this? Azim asked, approaching her. Battles are not for those unfamiliar with blood and death. I am not afraid, Layla replied. If I want to protect this kingdom, I must be part of this fight. Azim looked at her with respect, but also with a shadow of concern. He had known her since she was a child and knew she had the spirit of a warrior, but now he saw in her eyes the determination of a leader. In the throne room, Emperor Jalal discussed with his generals. The defense plan was clear. They had to hold out until dawn, when their allies were supposed to arrive. If the enemy army entered the city before sunrise, all would be lost. Long horns sounded beyond the walls of the fortress. The enemies had arrived, and in an instant, the silence of the night was shattered by the sound of war drums and the shouts of soldiers preparing to attack. Burning fires lit the horizon, and the shadows of enemy warriors could be seen in the distance. Layla gripped her sword hilt and looked at her father, who stood up, staring unwaveringly at the gates of the kingdom. The time has come, said the emperor. For the Golden Kingdom. The soldiers' battle cries echoed in the night, and the battle began. The sound of weapons erupted in the night, and the streets of the Golden Kingdom were engulfed in chaos. Arrows flew like shooting stars, and the sound of metal clashing on shields echoed everywhere. Layla stood on the palace walls, watching her soldiers fight bravely against their enemies. Her breathing was heavy, but she did not hesitate. It was time to prove who she really was. Azim beckoned her and held out a sword. His gaze was serious. They're going to try to break down the main gate, he said. We need to get down and stop them. Layla nodded and ran after him, adrenaline pumping through her veins. On the way, she joined a group of soldiers preparing to repel the attack. Behind them, Emperor Jalal was at the head of his army, fighting furiously for his kingdom. A loud explosion shook the walls, and the wooden gates cracked under the blows of the battering ram. The enemies began to rush into the fortress, but Layla and her men met them with swords drawn. Her blows were precise, every move guided by childhood training. In the midst of the battle, a masked warrior, dressed in black. He made his way through the crowd, heading straight for her. Layla raised her sword just in time to block the powerful attack that almost knocked her off balance. Who are you? She shouted, trying to regain her balance. The man didn't answer, but his movements were dangerous, each attack pushing her closer to the wall. Layla gathered all her strength and retaliated with a swift blow, managing to cut through his cloak. For a split second, their eyes met, and Layla froze. It's impossible, she whispered. But before she could say more, a loud explosion echoed behind them, and the world collapsed into chaos again. Dust and smoke covered the streets of the kingdom, and the sound of battle continued to echo in the night. Layla, still shocked by the identity of the mysterious warrior, struggled to get up from the ruins into which she had been thrown by the explosion. She felt a metallic taste in her mouth and a sharp pain in her arm, but she didn't have time to stop. Around her, the Imperial soldiers tried to repel the attack, but the enemy was well organized. Flames had engulfed several buildings near the central square, and shadows moved quickly among the ruins. Layla searched for her sword among the rubble, and, when she found it, she felt someone grab her hand. She looked up and met the burning eyes of the masked warrior. Despite the chaos around her, time seemed to stop for a moment. You must leave here, princess, he said in a serious but protective tone. Layla pulled her hand back and raised her sword threateningly. Who are you? Why are you fighting on the enemy's side? The man hesitated for a moment, then removed his mask. Layla felt her heart stop for a split second. It can't be, she whispered. His gaze was full of regret, but also determination. You don't have time to understand now. If you stay here, you will die, he continued. Listen to me, Layla. Before he could say more, a rain of arrows descended on them. The man quickly pulled his mask back on and pushed Layla into a side passage. Find your people and run, he shouted, then disappeared into the chaos of the battle. Layla stood still for a moment, her heart pounding. Who was he really? And why did she feel that behind that attack was much more than just war? But there was no time for questions. She gripped her sword in her hand and ran towards the palace, determined to discover the truth. Layla made her way through the ruins of the kingdom, her heart pounding in her chest. Her mind was troubled by the image of the mysterious warrior. Who was he really? And why did he look so familiar? Arriving at the palace, she found the inner courtyard in complete chaos. Wounded soldiers, servants running in all directions, the emperor's generals shouting orders. Emperor Jalal stood on the palace steps, his bloody sword in his hand, giving his last directives to the remaining troops. Layla, he shouted when he saw her approaching. Where have you been? Father, the enemy is not what it seems, she replied, looking around anxiously. We must talk. The emperor did not have time to ask more, because at that moment the palace gates were shaken by another explosion. A group of enemy soldiers entered the courtyard. At their head was the same masked warrior. Layla drew her sword, but he raised a hand, stopping the attack of his men. We are not here to destroy you, he shouted over the noise of the battle. We have come to warn you. They all stopped. Emperor Jalal frowned, looking at the mysterious man. What are you talking about? Asked the emperor. The warrior took off his mask, and Layla felt a cold shiver run down her spine. I am Tariq, son of the king of the West, he said. My father has been betrayed. The true enemy is not us, but someone who has betrayed you from within. An uneasy murmur ran through the courtyard. Layla felt a new fear grip her heart. If what Tariq was saying was true, then the danger was much greater than she had imagined. Who betrayed us? Emperor Jalal asked in a sharp voice. Tariq looked around, hesitating for a moment, then he uttered a name that made Layla's blood run cold. Azim. A cold shiver ran through the crowd gathered in the palace courtyard. Azim's name hung in the air like a sentence spoken too late. Layla felt her knees weaken for a moment. Azim, the one who had been her friend, confidant, protector. How was this possible? Emperor Jalal gripped the hilt of his sword, glaring at Tariq with steely eyes. Prove it, he said gravely. Tariq straightened his back, and from the shadows of the gate emerged a chained man, his clothes torn. He was one of the royal advisors, Amir, who was believed to have been killed during an attack on an imperial caravan. Your Majesty, he said hoarsely. I was captured and forced to remain silent, but I saw it with my own eyes. Azim met secretly with the enemies of the kingdom. He gave them information about our weaknesses. An angry murmur ran through the crowd. Layla stifled a cry. She could not believe it, but her father's frozen gaze told her that Jalal was already considering the terrible possibility. Call Azim, the emperor ordered. Several guards ran to the wing of the palace where the commander of the Imperial Guard had his chambers. But after a few minutes, they returned with pale faces. He's gone, one of them said. He grabbed his weapons and fled into the night. Layla's heart broke. If Azim had fled, it was true. We will find him, Emperor Jalal said, his voice thundering across the palace courtyard. And when we do, he will pay for his betrayal. Layla clenched her fists. She would be the one to find Azim, and she would find the truth, no matter the cost. Night had fallen over the kingdom, but the palace was still awake, haunted by whispers and unrest. Layla could not sit still. The truth about Azim had torn her heart, but anger pushed her forward. She could not let this betrayal go unpunished. She was slipping through the palace corridors when she felt a presence behind her. She turned with her hand on the hilt of her sword, but relaxed immediately when she saw Tariq. You want to go after him, don't you? He said, reading the intentions in his eyes. I can't wait for someone else to find him, Layla replied. If Azim ran away, he has a plan. I have to stop him before it's too late. Tariq sighed and ran a hand through his dark hair. If you go, you won't go alone, I'll come with you. Layla hesitated for a moment. Did she trust him? It was still hard for her to accept that her former enemy could now be her ally. But she had no choice. She needed help. Okay, but we move quickly. And without mistakes, she said firmly. Tariq smiled slightly. I make no mistakes, princess. Without wasting any more time, the two slipped out of the palace, disappearing into the shadows of the city. Layla didn't know where this search would take them, but one thing was certain: Azim would pay for what he had done. The night wind whipped their faces as Layla and Tariq slipped through the dark alleys of the city. Chapter 5.An Unexpected Alliance. Every shadow could hide a spy, every noise could announce a trap. But Layla was not intimidated. The thought of Azim and his betrayal fueled her determination. Do you know where he could be hiding? Tariq asked, stepping carefully on the dusty pavement. Layla bit her lower lip, trying to gather her thoughts. Azim knows the city better than anyone. If he has fled, he will try to find refuge in a safe place. Perhaps the inn on the edge of the black market, where mercenaries and fortune-seekers gather. Tariq nodded. Then that's where we're going. The two slipped through the buildings, soon reaching the inn. It was an old building, with drawn shutters and an oppressive atmosphere. From inside, the deep voices of men could be heard sharing their drinks and ill-gotten gains. Layla and Tariq approached the entrance. Tariq placed a hand on the hilt of his sword. We don't know what awaits us inside, be prepared. Layla gave him a stern look. I'm always prepared. With that, she pushed the door open and stepped inside, ready to face her past, and the man who had betrayed her family. And the dark inn, thick hookah smoke hung above the tables, mixing with the loud laughter of the mercenaries. Layla pulled her hood lower over her forehead, trying to hide her features as Tariq scanned the room with a sharp gaze. Azim must be here, Layla whispered. They slipped through the crowded tables, slipping past the drunks playing dice. Tariq motioned her discreetly to a dark corner. There, with his back to the wall and a goblet of wine in his hand, stood Azim. Layla felt anger rising in her chest. The traitor was here, drinking as if nothing had happened. She clenched her fists, but Tariq touched her arm gently, warning her not to give in to impulse. We have to draw him out, he said softly. Layla bit her lip, but she knew he was right. If they attacked now, they risked finding themselves with dozens of mercenaries against them. They moved away from the table, setting a trap. Tariq motioned to the innkeeper and slipped him a few gold coins. The man nodded and walked over to Azim, whispering something in his ear. The traitor raised an eyebrow and, after a few moments of hesitation, slowly rose from the table and walked out the back door. Now is the time, Layla whispered. Without thinking, she and Tariq followed him into the night. Outside, Azim waited, one hand on the hilt of his sword. I knew you would come, he said with a dark smile. Now let's see if you are ready to face the truth. Layla drew her sword, sensing that the decisive moment was near. The night air was charged with tension. Azim watched Layla and Tariq with a wry smile, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. His eyes scanned their every move, searching for a weakness to exploit. What do you mean, the truth? Layla asked, her sword steady but not yet raised. Azim laughed softly, a contemptuous sound that made her jaw tighten. Do you think I am the only traitor? He said. Do you think everything is as it seems? Your kingdom, your family, everything is built on lies. Layla suppressed the urge to attack him on the spot. Speak clearly, Azim. What are you hiding? Something Jalal never told you, Azim replied, taking a step back. You were raised in the illusion of a perfect world, but the truth is that the roots of your kingdom are full of blood. Your father made sacrifices, some you would never accept. Layla felt a shiver run down her spine. Was Azim lying? Or was there something he didn't know? Tariq drew his sword, losing his patience.